Thank you for the speech. We now turn to the second paper speaker for the opposition, Andrew Bowie MP. Andrew has served as the Member of Parliament for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine since 2017, sitting in the Shadow Cabinet representing veterans as well as being a Shadow Minister for Energy Security and Net Zero. He has previously worked as Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Prime Minister and Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party. You have the ears of the House.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the Cambridge Union, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. I didn't think we were going to be relitigating the 2017 and 2019 general elections by debating the merits or otherwise of Jeremy Corbyn this evening. I might suggest that the reason that Jeremy Corbyn is no longer leader of the Labour Party is that after two general election defeats, one of the worst in Labour's history, the Labour Party finally decided they had to get serious about attempt to get back into government and actually reorganise themselves and able to do so, and got a leader who was able to be elected. In terms of my membership of the CFI, I am proud to say that I'm a friend of Israel. I'm also proud to say that I'm a friend of Alan Duncan, and we share a combined view that the only way to peace and a sustainable peace in that war-torn region is a two-state solution. And the sooner we get to that end, the better. But that's not what we're here to debate tonight, Mr. President, nor indeed members. It's a huge honour, as I say, to return to the Cambridge Union to speak on the motion before us this evening, because I do so, and I do believe that British democracy is indeed not dead and has not failed. This is the second time I've had the honour of speaking to the Union, this august body, albeit the first time was virtual, as was necessitated by the COVID restrictions being put upon us at that time 2.5 years ago. The proposition before us tonight asserts that British democracy has failed. And we stand here debating democracy at the heart of one of the great institutions of our country, one of the great symbols of our freedoms, hard won and defended, our right to question, cajole, satirise, challenge, and indeed vote for the ideals that each of us, to our own, hold dear. This university has stood firm, as around it our democracy has grown and matured and evolved. Established 6 years before the signing of Magna Carta, Cambridge has been a seat of learning and debate as we evolve from monarchical absolutism through civil war and glorious revolution to constitutional monarchy through a union of crowns and a union of parliaments. This union here, this great society, established in the year we defeated tyranny in Europe, not for the last time, has grown and evolved as our democracy has grown and evolved around it. Through the great enfranchisement acts of the 19th and 20th centuries, the Parliament Act of 1911, to our acceding to and annexing of the European Union and the creation of the devolved parliamentary systems in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and many regions of England. We stand as a nation, as one of the few, the very few in the world, that can truly say that through centuries of evolution, freedom, the freedom to challenge, the freedom to choose, the freedom to decide who governs, lies at the very heart of who we are. And that democracy stands secure, safe, and working here in the United Kingdom. Now, the fact that I stand here as a Scottish Conservative defending British democracy might, I suppose, come as a bit of a surprise to some people in the room, because frankly, if anybody from any party has any reason to doubt whether or not democracy is working in this country, it is a Scottish Conservative, somebody who has consistently voted for a party that has seen us achieve upwards of 28% of the vote in Scotland, and yet has never elected more than 13 members of Parliament in this century. Indeed, as a minister in the previous government who now finds himself on the opposition benches, the very fact that I sit in the House of Commons where the governing party commands such a large majority, with 411 seats and 33% of the vote, to our 121 seats and 24% of the vote, my defence of democracy in Britain might seem strange. Although I will say, however, in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, where my majority increased, democracy seems to be alive and well. Mr. President, I believe that the situation here will change. I remain an optimist. But I oppose this motion as vigorously and as passionately as I do, because I do not believe democracy in this country has failed. Indeed, I worry that even the suggestion of its failure falls into the trap being set across the world by populists, by those who, through disinformation and aggression, would seek to convince the people of this country, and indeed other democratic countries, that democracy is failing and that another, more extreme model of government is needed to right the ills of the world as perceived by our enemies and indeed the enemies of freedom. Winston Churchill famously said, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is the best form of government. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." Mr. President, as ever, the great man hits the nail on the head. And for the purposes of the debate tonight, I acknowledge that British democracy is far from perfect. But I challenge anyone in this great chamber tonight, or indeed out there in this great seat of learning, or indeed wider still, to design a perfect one. Our system, with our gloriously unwritten constitution, has evolved and will evolve still further. But with its checks and balances on executive power, with its usual ability to deliver effective government, with its incredible flexible nature that allows for parties who would even seek to see the destruction of the British state to secede from our union, to sit as equals, respected and heard as the legitimately democratically elected third party in the United Kingdom, as the Scottish National Party did until earlier this year, shows me, beyond any doubt, that British parliamentary democracy works and indeed is in rude health. Indeed, I travelled here tonight from a parliament in Westminster, which now sees representation from 13 separate parties, plus some 14 independent MPs. That is not a sign that our democracy is broken. Indeed, it tells me that democracy in this country is flourishing. However, a word of warning. We cannot become complacent. We have heard tonight of low trust in politicians and institutions, of the threat of populism and the erosion of democratic norms, of low turnout, disillusionment of voters, and detachment from politics. I would say to this: if the British people criticise our politicians and political institutions, it is because our democratic culture has inculcated them to expect better. Our expectations for democracy in the UK are high, and it is right that we criticise and speak out when they are not met. If only 27% of people are satisfied with our democracy, it is because in developed, high-income nations with mature democracies, we come to expect a more perfect iteration of our democratic political system. Democracy is not... I'd be delighted wherever that came from. Yes?
All that aside, level with me. Is there not, seriously, a fundamental structural problem when something like a third of this country consistently votes for third parties and gets no representation or minor representation in national legislature? Is that not a fundamental problem that you do not have more than two options?
British democracy, as I said, has evolved and will evolve still further as we move forward. But the very idea that we're here debating tonight that has failed is the one that I take issue with. And the fact that, as I said, I came here tonight from a parliament now with 13 separate parties represented. The Liberal Democrats with their highest ever number of members of parliament. The DUP, the UUP, the SDLP, independents from many, the SNP, many other parties besides, sitting in that chamber, debating with us on points of principles and not once being shot down for having that view, being allowed to stand there, take their seat and democratically challenge the elected government shows me that the British democracy, although far from perfect, has not failed. Democracy, as I was about to say, is not perfection. Yes, it came from this direction over here, I think. Up there.
Would you not admit that British democracy has evolved from Magna Carta and before that from divine right of kings, from God, as a justification for rule, to Magna Carta, where we're all supposed to be judged equally, certainly the barons were at the time, down through the ages to where we've got to a situation of democracy where the Chartists were opposed on the basis that they could vote themselves higher wages or better living conditions, that the trade unions were oppressed at times throughout the 19th century until the Labour Party came along, and basically after the First World War there was a complete disillusionment with what had gone before. We see it with all the crosses and memorials everywhere. A new system had to be created, and it was the dictatorship of the proletariat in this country, just after the Russian Revolution, just after the Irish Revolution.
Please bring your remarks to a conclude.
The dictatorship of the proletariat, when people got the vote. The majority of people who consider themselves to be working class, they got the vote, and to this day, working class people who are still the majority could still vote in whatever government they wanted, if they were that interested. Obviously
Please phrase it as a question and keep it brief.
My question is, like democracy works in one way, it also works...
It's not a question. Please phrase it as a question.
Democracy has failed me, and democracy has failed lots of people like me, to an extreme where we think...
Please conclude your remarks. Please conclude your remarks. Please do continue, Andrew.
Thank you very much. I mean, all very interesting and valid points, and the very fact you're able to express that view and express the view that British democracy has failed speaks to me that it has, in fact, not failed. And in a democracy, you have to learn, as I have the hard way, very much so this year with the loss of so many colleagues and my now diminished status as a shadow minister as opposed to a minister, that you win and you lose. And that's how democracy works. And I won in the Scottish referendum in 2014, and I lost in the European referendum in 2016. As a country, we come together and we move forward, and that's one of the great things about this country, and it's one of the great things about democracy. As I was saying, democracy is not perfection. As Rousseau said, as every first first to second year HSPS student will know, where there are people of gods, their government would be democratic. So perfect a government is not for men. And yet we try. And while we may at times fall short of the expectations of the electorate, we recognize that as a nation, an imperfect democracy still outperforms the next alternative. Democracy, freedom, the rule of law, free trade, these are the values that made this country great and shaped the Western world, that saw in the shadow of war and devastation through Bretton Woods, the United Nations, NATO, the EU, the creation of an international rules-based order that would for more than half a century guide the peaceful nations of the world towards further cooperation and away from barbarous despotism and dangerous isolationism. For more than half a century, it was assumed, it was taken as a given, that where trade-led democracy would follow. It was thought, as more peoples were exposed to the glories of the West, the miracles of capitalism, the desire to throw off autocracy and embrace liberty and freedom would grow. We can no longer rest on those assumptions. The rise of authoritarian regimes, Autocracy Inc., as Anne Applebaum recently called it, the growing and strengthening alliances between the undemocratic and totalitarian powers of this world which you see today, the undermining of our own democratic processes by our enemies and the enemies of freedom, the understandable desire across democracies for simple and quick answers and solutions to really complex problems facing our peoples. Peoples tired of 2 decades of war, financial crash, pandemic, unprecedented movements of people, and a pace of technological change unparalleled in history. People who are tired of politicians failing to deliver on their promises, undermining their belief in the very thing which holds us together as a society, democracy. We need to fight this battle to defend democracy. It is a battle we cannot lose. And frankly, my friends, that battle starts tonight with a defense of our democracy, of our British democracy, evolved over centuries and evolving still, challenged, stressed, stretched over a difficult few years, but still working. Far from siding with those who undermine it, tonight I urge members of this House, this great and august organisation which has presided over and indeed has led so many of the debates that shaped how we govern ourselves, to vote against this motion and demonstrate that it does have confidence in British democracy, that it remains alive and indeed in the rudest of health. Thank you very much.